Hey, welcome back to the Mussar Mondays. It is such an honor to be back here this week, and we welcome all of our friends on all the different platforms, including WeLearn, and to our friends on Facebook. We are on the Torch Center page. We are now going to resume our study of cleanliness, nikiyut, and last week we left off on page 166, I believe, on the top. So as you remember, just as a quick summary, what we spoke about is that in order to take our next step in our spiritual growth, what we need to do is, we said step number one is vigilance. Start paying attention to the things that you do, pay attention to things you don't do, how you do certain things, how you respond to certain things, etc., etc. And then by that, taking note to what needs improvement in your life. The second step we said was rizut. Rizut means alacrity, not wasting time, getting things done, putting a priority on things that need to be accomplished, and not letting them fall to the wayside. We also discussed that if someone were to use laziness when it comes to mitzvahs, they'll end up ultimately not fulfilling the mitzvahs. Because in order to fulfill a mitzvah, you have an opportunity comes your way, you got to attack it immediately and not stop. Okay. Nikiyut means, and we spoke about this, is not getting into a situation where we have challenge. Right? How do you avoid difficult situations? How do you stay clean? And it's the trait of cleanliness. How do you stay clean of things that are impure, of things that are unholy, etc., etc.? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
Okay, so we're going to continue on page 166 in the Mesilat Yesharim. If you need a copy, you have over here on shelf number 29 in the magnificent Don Levitt Family Library. If you can get a couple of them out. No, down. Right. Stop. No, down.
Down?
Yep.
To your right.
Yeah, perfect. And the other two, there's three more over there. If you can just pull them out of the shelf. Not those two. They're not exactly the same. There you go. 1, 2. Here we go. Perfecto. Page 166. Anybody else need? Okay, great. Thank you again. Thank you to the Kiters for making this incredible contribution to our magnificent library so that people can always have them and use them. Really is a fundamental book. So if you don't have this is the Art Scroll edition of the Mesilat Yesharim, the writings of Ramchal, Path of the Just, or over here translated as Way of the Upright. Okay, we're 4 lines from the top on page 166. Although essential, nikiyut is not easily acquired. Now, certainly, it is a great undertaking for a person to achieve perfection of this trait. For the recognized and well-known sins are relatively easy for a person to avoid. So we know that a person, it's easy for them to avoid certain knowledgeable sins, right? Okay, those that are public, people know this is a sin, i.e. stealing, right? I.e. Adultery, etc., etc. These are sins that are known to all, and those are easier for one to stay away from. Kevan shora'atam gluya, because their impropriety is obvious. Achadikduk hazeh. He says, but the scrupulousness required for attaining the proper nikiyut of cleanliness is the more difficult challenge. Ki hora'at ha'heter mechaseh al hachet ukmoch shechatavti. He says, because the heart's rationalization hides in the subtle sin, as I have written above. So let's think of a subtle sin. Slander. Mm-hmm. We know that it's just, it's true. I happen to hate the guy anyway, so let me just say something. It's not a big deal. It's like... Right? So we find excuses. And finding those excuses doesn't allow us to cleanse ourselves from these negative traits. Doesn't allow us to keep ourselves clean. So he says, so 2 Talmudic sources demonstrate that avoiding subtle wrongdoing is a daunting task. okay, means just the small things, just staying away from, it's very interesting that the Chavetz Chaim in his writings on Lashon Hara, he says a very interesting thing. He says, we think Lashon Hara is words that we use with our mouth. He says it's not only the words you use with your mouth. He says it's also a winking of an eye.
Yeah.
It's also a head nod. Like, the guy does something and then you give that nod to your friend, you say, hey, right? And he gets exactly what you're saying, right? You didn't say anything. But it's enough to belittle someone else. And let me just step back for 1 second and give you my very simple understanding of what Lashon Hara is and why it is such a grave sin. So imagine this. I meet a new guy. I met Alex. Let's just, for example, pick Alex. If there was someone like that in this room who was from Chicago, right? So imagine. So what's so funny? I don't know. Okay. So either way, so imagine there was such an individual. And the first time I meet him, he looks like a reasonable guy. He doesn't look like an axe murderer. He doesn't look like he's a pedophile. He looks like a very nice, stable human being, a mature adult. You shake his hand. He looks like a presentable individual. Okay, great. So, how many honor credits would you say he has? How many human value points does he have? Right? In your meeting him the first time, I would say about 1,000 value points. Now imagine I meet somebody else, a friend of mine. I said to him, I just met this guy. His name is Alex from Chicago, etc., etc. And he says, "Oh, great guy, great guy, love the guy." Right? Now, where did that 1,000 points go? Did it go down? No, it went up. Mm-hmm. How many points? Maybe another 25 points. And if it's someone you really respect and really look up to, it was maybe 50 points or 100 points, right? Now, what happens if that person that you talk to about Alex says, oh, that guy, oh, the one from Chicago, realtor, watch your pockets. Okay, watch your pockets, right? Now, what's going to happen? I'm not going to say anything. I'm just saying, right? What happens? Where did that 1,000 points go right now? It was diminished. It went down to 950, 900, right? You understand? That's the Lashon Hara. That is the power of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara, when you say something negative about another person, by the way, anybody who's looking for a realtor, I highly recommend you call Alex from Chicago, right? Because he's phenomenal. Phenomenal. He will find you the house you want at the price you want, he might even find you a piano for your house. I mean, it's like everything you can imagine. So, do we have a phone number to add to that promo? But either way, but when there's something positive that you say about a person, it just adds the value to that person's human value points, right? But if you say something negative, it diminishes. Now, I want to just, while we're at this, add a story. A friend of mine told me the following story. He said that he met someone who he didn't exactly respect on a very high level. It was an old friend of his who's done some shady things over his lifetime. And he met him, and they were talking about an old acquaintance of theirs. So he says, and again, this non-respected friend of his tells him something negative about their acquaintance. Something really derogatory. And he said to himself, I don't believe this guy. I don't believe him. Not 1 ounce do I believe him. I really don't. But he still couldn't help it that when he met that acquaintance, he had some doubt. Maybe he's right. Maybe this person is really, a trickster. Maybe he's not genuine. Maybe somewhere in the back of his mind, and that's another element of Lashon Hara that's a very, very powerful and terrifying thing, that a person could be saying a total fabrication, something which is totally untrue, something which was made up and doesn't have any feet to its truth. And yet, we hear something about someone, and we're like, well, maybe, could be, very possible. right? So we have to be so careful to protect ourselves from listening, hanging around with people who potentially could be purveyors of negative talk, negative speech, and certainly not be the ones to share negative information about other people. My fundamental rule I always tell people is, if someone is not there to defend themselves, it really is wrong to talk about them. If they're there in the room, you can say something, let them defend themselves at least, right? It could still, it still falls into the category of Lashon Hara. But at least they can defend themselves. I'm not saying you should say it, but certainly not when they're not there to defend themselves. It's not right, right? Okay.
It happens all the time, no?
It does. So I'll tell you one other incredible story, which I'm sure some of you have heard. A really phenomenal story about the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim not only was the author of this book the book called the Chavetz Chaim. That's where he got his name. Many of the great scholars got their names from the books they wrote. Right? The Chazon Ish, that wasn't his name. His name was Rav Yeshaya Karelitz, right? But his book that he wrote was called the Chazon Ish, so that was his name, right? That became his name. The Chavetz Chaim, that wasn't his name. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, right? But that was the book he wrote, and that's the book that people got to know him from. So that became his name. So the Chavetz Chaim was once traveling, and everybody knew that the Chavetz Chaim was a master of Torah. He was an incredible Jew. So he once walked onto the train. He was traveling from city to city selling his books. And the person sitting on the train saw, oh, there's another rabbi, there's another Jew. I'll sit with them in his cabin, whatever. So he sat with him. The Chavetz Chaim was a little hot in the thing. Chavetz Chaim opens the window, and this person stands up and slams it. He had no idea who he was sitting in the cabin with. Slams the window shut. Okay, Chavetz Chaim realized that this person's a little bit of a delicate person. So he starts to try to spark up conversation with the individual. So he says, oh, it's nice to meet you. Where are you from? What's your name? And so on and so forth. So the person asks him back, and where are you from? He says, I'm from Radin. Radin was the city that the Chavetz Chaim lived in. So he says, Radin? 1 second, the Chavetz Chaim lives in Radin. Now he's talking to the Chavetz Chaim, not knowing that he's actually talking to him. So the Chavetz Chaim says to him, who's the Chavetz Chaim? Right? So the person stood up and gave the Chavetz Chaim, not knowing, he gave him a
dissertation.
He gave him a patch. Right? How dare you talk about the Chavetz Chaim like that? And he was like disgusted by the Chavetz Chaim's. So when they got to the destination, so the person goes out one door, Chavetz Chaim goes out the other door, and he sees it's a whole commotion by the car of the train. Like everyone's standing there. He's like, what? He asks, what's the whole commotion here? Who you guys? So what do you mean the Chavetz Chaim? And then he sees that the person that he slapped was the Chavetz Chaim, the preeminent leader of Torah in that generation. You can imagine. So the person didn't know what to do with himself, and the Chavetz Chaim requested to meet with him the next day. And the next day, the person comes and he's crying and wailing, wants to get forgiveness. And the Chavetz Chaim comes and greets him with a huge smile and a huge hug. And he says, what? He says, gives him food and gives him drink. He's like, why are you honoring me? He says, what do you mean? He says, you taught me a halacha. You taught me something I didn't know. You taught me that a person is not allowed to say Lashon Hara about themselves. He says, you taught me that, so I have to treat you like my Rebbe, like my teacher. Is that great? That was the Chavetz Chaim. Is that amazing? Don't even say Lashon Hara about yourself. Okay, but these are what Chazal, where our sages are telling us, are small things, right? Subtle sins. Okay, so two Talmudic sources demonstrate that avoiding subtle wrongdoing is a daunting task. And this is similar to what the sages of blessed memory said in the Talmud, Avodah Zarah, Tractate Avodah Zarah 18a. The sins that a person tramples on with his heels, meaning ones that it's commonplace, surround him at the time of judgment. And on the similar vein, the sages of blessed memory said in a different Talmud, Rubam begezel miutam ba'arayot v'kulam ba'avak lashon hara. Most people stumble in matters of theft. A minority of them in illicit relationships. And all of them get caught up in the dust of evil speech. It's so easy to say something negative about someone, right? It's so easy. So it's like everyone gets caught up in that, right? I think there's another component of why we do that. Why would I say something negative? Why would I have the inclination to say something negative about someone else? Why would I?
Lots of reasons.
Our sages tell us that there's only one way to grow, and that is to elevate yourself. By knocking other people down, you're never going to grow. Sometimes we try to use knocking other people as a mechanism to try to convince ourselves that we're growing from it. And that's another reason why Lashon Hara is such a terrible thing. Lashon Hara is so terrible because you think by knocking someone else, talking negatively about someone else, that you're going to elevate yourself. That's wrong. Right? You don't elevate yourself like that. People think, oh, he's a terrible guy. Yeah? And by him being a terrible guy, I'm a good guy. No. You'll never grow on someone else's decline. You'll never elevate yourself because you knocked someone else down. You agree? You understand?
Yeah, but I don't agree with you. But that's all right.
About which one?
But what you just said, I don't think that that's necessarily why people speak negatively about somebody.
No, people.
I mean, that's just
That's
one
not why.
reason.
It's not why they do, but it's another reason why they do.
It's one.
It's one of many
because
reasons.
there's
Oh,
lots of reasons
100%.
why people do it. Yeah.
100%. And we have to realize that it's such a delicate thing. It's someone else's life. It really is someone else's life. It is someone else's their honor, their dignity. It could be their livelihood. It could be their it could also be their shidduch, their match. Right? Imagine this. Someone calls you up and says, "So, what do you have to say about this young man?" And you're like, "Well, let me explain." Right? That's not a good way to ever to start explaining about anything, right? Or you know, tell me, do you know this family? I know the family, but I just need, right? There's very, very strict laws about, specifically about, someone asks you, I'm about to enter a partnership with this individual. I know you had some previous experiences with them. What can you tell me? Is the guy a thief? Is he honest? Right? So if you know something negative, you're not allowed to say it. But you can't either, you have to know how to ask such a question. I'll tell you just very quickly because we're online and I don't want anyone to come out of this without some clarity. The way you should properly ask the question is as follows. I know that you can't tell me details. I know that you can't share with me any potential negative information. If you had the choice of working with this person or perhaps dating this person, right, would you do it? That's a personal thing that they can say, no, I wouldn't. Why is not relevant, why? And they don't have to get into why. But that's a fair question that you can ask that could be answered without Lashon Hara being spoken. Got that? So that means, if you have an individual who comes over to you and says, I'm looking into this girl for a potential dating candidate, right? Hopefully for marriage, to get engaged and get married. Okay, so people do this all the time. They investigate and find that information. I know before I met my incredible wife, the information that we needed to find, right? Thank God it was incredible, impeccable information about the family, about the siblings, about my wife, right? Find out from friends, from neighbors, from the community rabbi, from teachers, from principals, from dorm counselors, whatever information you can get. Why? Because you want to get a full picture of who this person is. You want to get a picture of their personality. You want to get a picture of their family. Are they healthy people, etc., etc. These are things that's very important. But what's if someone has, God forbid, something negative to say? You're not allowed to say it. You can't say negative about another person. So you have to know how to ask the question properly. The question is, if you were suggested this idea, would you pursue it? If you were proposed the opportunity to work with such a person, would you go into a partnership with them? And then that's a yes or no question. Their no could be just no, because I don't want to invest with anyone, because I don't do any partnership. It doesn't have to necessarily be the negative about that person. But to get into the details, the nitty-gritty details, unless there is a major, there are some conditions upon which you can speak Lashon Hara about someone, of which is not the scope of this class. We can talk about it in another class, another time, but it's not in the scope of tonight's class. So, small sins, right? Small sins, everybody. What is a small sin? Avak Lashon Hara, the dust of evil speech. The dust is everywhere. It's like the little stuff. It's the little sprinkles of Lashon Hara. Illicit relationships, everybody knows that's inappropriate, right? So you have some people, but it's not a common place where everybody, right? But theft, right? Theft is something which is more commonly found than inappropriate relationships. Okay. Because due to the exceedingly subtle nature of Lashon Hara, all people stumble in the dust of evil speech. Right? Kol bnei Adam nechshalim bo b'ma she'ein makirin oto, to the extent that they do not recognize such speech as a sin to begin with. So they don't even recognize that it's a sin. They speak and they don't even realize, oh, I shouldn't be talking, right? So there's a couple of rules. First is, don't talk about other people. If you do talk about other people, don't talk negatively about other people. Very simple. And if it's that difficult, don't talk. Just don't talk. Okay? Our sages speak of King David. King David's mastery of this trait and what he merited as a result. Our sages of blessed memory said, that King David was vigilant and would cleanse himself entirely from all of these subtle sins that most people trample underfoot. And therefore he would go to war against his enemies with absolute trust that he would be victorious. You know why? Because he's clean of sin. If a person is clean of sin, they have nothing to worry about that they will falter or lose in a battle because of a sin that now they're getting paid back for. He knew that he was so clean and he worked hard on himself to cleanse himself of all sin, of even the subtle little dust of Lashon Hara type sins, that he knew that going to war wouldn't be a punishment for him, but rather he would end up victorious. And therefore he would go to war against his enemies with absolute trust that he would be victorious. And would ask Hashem, Psalms 18:38, allow me to pursue my foes and my enemies and overtake them. Do not let me return until they are destroyed. Lefi shahayu minukim kol kach. Lefi shahayu minukim kol kach. Something that Yoshaphat, Asaph, Chizkiah, who were also righteous kings, did not consider themselves worthy to ask to return with their enemies decimated and them still victorious, because they were not so cleansed of these sins as was King David. So we see that to cleanse ourselves and think of a specific mitzvah, think of any mitzvah or any sin. You know what it would take? It would take a lot of focus and a lot of attention to cleanse ourselves completely from a sin. I mean, totally. So think of it. Theft. Theft is very easy to steal, right? I'll give you an example. The Talmud says that there was a great sage, all the sages, they would walk, there was a path, a shortcut that they would take through someone's property. Now, the person who lived there allowed the people to walk through, and the Talmud goes through a whole discussion of when it's permitted, when it's not permitted, etc., to walk through someone's property. And if it's permitted for a certain amount of time, you're already not allowed to close it, even if you're a new a new homeowner in that same property, you can't close an open shortcut, right? Because people have a habit of walking through, and okay, there's many laws about it. So one of the great sages was walking through that shortcut. That person who lived there passed away, and his daughter now approached the rabbi, and she saw that the rabbi was picking a little toothpick from the picket fence that was there. There was a picket fence, and the rabbis would walk by, and they would take their shortcut there. But this rabbi stopped by the fence, took a little piece for like a toothpick. So she says, "You're a thief." He says, "One second." He says, "It's less than the value of something which is considered theft." Right? It's less than a value of even like less than a penny's worth. Well, what is that little piece of wood worth? Nothing. If you go to Home Depot and you say, "I want a piece of wood like this," right? Right? How much does this cost? Right? They'll say, "Take it." Okay, go. You can go. It's not worth anything, right? So he says it's less than the value of anything. So she said, "Yeah, that might be true. But if everybody takes that little piece of thing, I'm not going to have a fence left." Okay. I always tell my children, I don't go to restaurants frequently, but when I do, and my children see on the way out, they have toothpicks and they have some candies. So some people like to I might need in 6 months from now, I might be stuck in traffic and not know what to do. I'll have these toothpicks I can pull out of my car console, right? Is that why they're there for? They have one, so that if you have some meat stuck between your teeth, so you can clean your teeth, right? Right? But for you to take 50, I don't think that's right. And I always tell my children, you take one. You take one. Candies is not for you to stock up for Simchas Torah, so that you can, right? That's not what the candies are there for. The candies for you to have something to refresh your mouth. You take one candy, that's it, right? That could potentially fall into the category of not being careful with theft. Because if it starts with one toothpick and one candy, what's the next thing? Right? You go to the bank and you clean them out of all their pens. Like it's like all my souvenir pens, you know, it's like, by the way, anybody who wants torch pens, you can take as many as you want. Okay, I'm just letting you know in advance. And water bottles, okay? Whatever, we're here to help, you know. It's like if you need, you can have. But theft is something that's very easy for someone. You know, I always say this to give this example with Bernie Madoff. Right? We should never learn from his terrible actions and misdeeds. But he didn't start with $60 billion. That wasn't his ambition. It started with cheating on taxes for $60, $600, $6,000. And before you know it, it keeps on growing and growing because it becomes okay. We become okay with these little rounding errors and we become okay with it. And it's something which can become very, very common for a person, and that's what Ramchal is warning us of, to stay clean. Imagine someone who's clean on every single penny. Every single penny. That also means not to steal, not to cut someone online. Right? Not to cut someone online. That's also theft. You're stealing their time. Right? Not to make noise when someone else is sleeping. You're stealing their sleep. Right? These are things that we have to consider. If someone really wants to work on every detail of a sin to cleanse themselves, it's multifaceted. Okay, you can't just say, "Well, I'm not going to go to a bank and hold them up at gunpoint, and that's how I'm going to work on not stealing." That's one point, one aspect of theft, but that's not necessarily what's going to do it, right? And of course, we have to think about that. So the others. Yehoshaphat, Asa, Chizkiyahu, who were righteous kings, did not consider themselves worthy because they weren't as cleansed as King David was, to make such a statement and to hopefully have God's assistance in that way. Ramchal shows how the sage's understanding of David HaMelech, King David's request, is indicated in the words of King David himself. And this is what he himself, King David, stated in the course of his words of his prayer in Psalms 18:21. Yigmaleni Hashem kitzitki kivor yodai yashivli. Hashem, Please recompense me according to my righteousness. Repay me in a way befitting the purity of my hands. It means King David really worked hard to have clean hands, to be clean of all sin, to be clean of all theft, to be clean of all potential sin. Ve'amarod, and he said even further, V'yashev Hashem li kitzitki kibor yadai leneged einav. And he said further of that psalm, verse 25, Hashem repaid me in accordance with my righteousness, according to the purity of my hands before his eyes. V'hu habor v'anikayon hazeh shezacharnu. And this purity of hands, of which King David speaks, in the purity and cleanliness that we have discussed in this chapter. Right? This is the purity and cleanliness that we have discussed so far in this chapter. Ve'az chazar v'amar, and only after that he says, Ki v'cha arutz gdud erdof oivai v'asigem. And then he goes to say further in the psalm, for with you I smash a troop, and with God I leap over a wall, and allow me to pursue my foes and overtake them. Do not let me return until they are destroyed. Which is the verse the sages cite for King David's unique request for victory, as mentioned above. Thus we see that the psalm itself, that King David makes, we see from the psalm itself, that King David makes this request, this unique request, in the merit of his own trait of nikiyut, cleanliness. Meaning, to keep ourselves clean. Now, there are many different areas of life that need this attention, that need this focus. Ramchal brought 3 examples. He says, number 1, that it's prevalent, theft. All types of theft. Every type of theft. Number 2, what's number 2? Adultery. Adultery, right? That can also be a pitfall for people. Not to go certain places, not to look at certain things, not to hang around people who speak in certain ways that it allows to have conversation that turns south, right? And then the last one was inappropriate speech, right? Of lashon hara. These 3 things are things that sadly in our generation today are very prevalent. Are very prevalent. Where people speak in ways, right? In most shows today, the late night shows and things like that, a lot of what they say is inappropriate. It's not nice. It's right. So it opens up a doorway of people to start talking in a certain way. It becomes commonplace because hey, it was said on national television, so I can say it too. And it's a very, very terrible thing for us to get into a habit of having such type of perversion in our actions, in our thoughts, in our words, etc., etc. And we see this again from King David. Ramchal now also proves that King David his own words, and they learn another assertion made from what we said before. Right? King David asked, he says further, right, in 24:4, who may ascend the mountain of Hashem and who may stand in his place of his sanctity? Only one with clean hands and pure heart. Thus, King David himself essentially says what was asserted earlier. Only one who is completely cleansed from every trace of sin and iniquity is the one who is suited to see the presence of the King of Hashem. Right? Niki chapayim uvar levav, someone who is cleansed of their hands and pure of the heart is the person who is capable of being close to God. So if we're trying to elevate ourselves and take that 3rd rung on Ramchal's ladder of growth, what is required? The next step is cleanliness. To be clean of sin. To right? And to remove ourselves from situations. I'm trying to think of a story that I don't remember the details of, but it was about someone saying that they knew that they had certain protection because there were certain sins they were so careful over their lifetime not to sin. They knew they were clean. Whether it's not to look at things that they shouldn't look at, not to talk about things they shouldn't talk about, right? So that serves as a protection for someone, for their own spirituality. I mentioned last week that my rabbi told all of us, his students who are also rabbis, ordained rabbis, that we all had to have filters on our devices. In fact, if you want to log into the intranet, which is the internal web for all of these students, and a place you can ask questions, and a place you can listen to different classes, and so on and so forth. Internal material. One of the things you have to do when you're filling out your application to get a login is, what is the web filter that you use? Why is it so important? Right? It's not archaic. It's not being overprotective. It is because if we care about our own spirituality, we won't want to be in a situation where we could fall into a trap. There are many great programs out there that we can use on our phones, on our computers, and we're spending a lot of time on phones and computers. Potentially, there could be a lot of harm. People are spending, sadly, hours and hours and hours and hours looking at inappropriate things, right? Perhaps writing inappropriate things. It's an incredible thing. This whole world that we're in today, where we have a very, very polarized political world, and people say things, both in the news media and people who comment on different tweets and different posts, right, in a way that they would never ever consider speaking with their own words. They would never say it to your face, but because it's behind a screen, suddenly I have the courage. Suddenly, right? Yeah. But the truth is, it's cowardly, right? It's to hide behind a screen, and that's why you have today. You have serious situations of libel and other types of speech that could be illegal, because people are writing things and saying things, right? Slander is when you say things, and libel, I believe, is when you write things, right? Defamation, defamatory things about someone else. And if it's not true, then you just ruin someone's life. You can ruin their career. You can ruin their livelihood. You can ruin everything. All of their reputation, all of their honor, all of their dignity. And it's a very interesting thing. They say that the highest rate of suicide in prison is by white-collar criminals. You know why? Till now, the guy was a wealthy guy. Everybody came and asked for advice, and they're like, "Oh, we need your wisdom." Suddenly, nobody comes to ask any more advice. Nobody's there to visit. No one's there to, right? What happened suddenly, right? It's an interesting thing. But either way, cleansing ourselves of the small things, of the simple things. King David also implies here that attaining nikiyut, attaining cleanliness, is no small accomplishment. Ramchal therefore notes, "Ve'omnam vadai shamidah zot kasha." In truth, surely this trait is difficult to acquire, very difficult. Ki teva ha'adam chalash v'libo nifteh al nikala. For the nature of man is weak, and his heart is easily swayed by the allure of physicality. It's very interesting. In the Shema, we say an amazing thing. It says, "V'lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei einechem." Do not sway, do not follow your eyes and your heart. You know what happens? Levavchem ve'acharei einechem, your heart and your eyes. You know what happens? Is that it says that if a person has boredom leads to sin. Boredom leads to sin. So our sages tell us an interesting thing. You go and you're looking around. You're looking around at the mall. You're going shopping, and you're like, I don't have money to spend, but I'm just looking, right? you know what can result from that? You can become jealous of somebody. You could decide, you know what, that's something I'm not letting go. I need to buy that. So people can resort to stealing. I need to have it. I can't live without it. Right? There's many different things that a person can do. But where did it all come from? It came because you looked. When you look and you're not careful what you look at, the heart desires it. The heart desires it. The heart is tempted. Right? And then when the heart has a lust for something and a desire for something, it needs to attain it. Right? So very careful. That's what we say in the Shema. Right? Twice a day, morning and evening, to remind us, be careful what you put your eyes on. Because what you put your eyes on, you're going to put your heart on and desire it. And it may be terrible for you. It may be destructive to your spirituality, etc., etc. So he says, and he permits it for himself the things for which he can find sufficient grounds to be misled into believing they're permissible. Surely, one who has attained perfection in this trait has already reached a lofty spiritual level. He says, for he has already stood in the face of a powerful battle and prevailed. That's an amazing thing, is that we all face a challenge. We all face a challenge all the time. We face a challenge of whether or not we're going to get angry. We're going to face a challenge. And these are our own personal traits. Am I going to be humble? Am I going to gloat about my successes? Am I going to show off, right? Am I going to be, right, angry? Am I going to be patient? Am I going to be, arrogant, right? All of these things that we're talking about. Someone who's able to stay away from these things, don't put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to overcome. If you know that there's a potential that you will fall to these small sins, it's going to be, you're going to give into it. It's going to be a terrible thing for you. Right? So that's what our sages here in what Ramchal is teaching us from King David, to stay away from these little sinful things. Ramchal concludes, he says, now that we have explained the general outline of nikiyut, of cleanliness, we will proceed in the following chapter to clarify the details of the trait. Now let's read quickly the summary of chapter 10. He says, nikiyut refers to cleansing oneself from even a subtle manifestation of bad traits and subtle traits of wrongdoing that can result from rationalization. Right? Sometimes we rationalize to ourselves, and it right? As long as one is still under the spell of desire for physical gratification, he is susceptible to such rationalization, to justify the things that we want to do. We want to, right? And a person can very easily fall into that trap. Only once he has clearly freed himself from these desires will he be able to recognize and avoid any trace of sin. Therefore, if one wishes to be a naki, which is someone who is clean and pure, pristine from all these negative sins, then after attaining zehirus, which is what we said, watchfulness and vigilance, and zerizus, which is alacrity, he will continue to strengthen his love of Hashem and passion for mitzvos until his desire for spirituality extinguishes the fire of his desire for earthly pleasures. You know, the Talmud says, we learned this in the Daf Yomi about 3 weeks ago, that if the Yetzer Hara attacks you, what do you do if the Yetzer Hara attacks you?
Pray, yeah, right. Yeah.
Pull him to the study hall, right? If that doesn't help, say the Shema. If that doesn't help, remember the day of death.
Remember what?
The day of death. Right? That ought to put a shudder in every spine, right? Right? It's like, whoa, right? We're all going to die. We're not here for good. I might as well do the right thing, right? Our sages tell us we have to be very, very careful, right? We have these desires, we have these temptations. We have to remove them, so they don't pull us down. This is a difficult task, but accomplishing it is a supreme achievement. and this is what our sages say, is focusing properly on the cleaning out of our negative traits. You know what? If we can avoid going certain places, then we should avoid going to certain places. If we can avoid talking about certain things, don't talk about them. If we can, you know, the more there are things we can do that are in our power. They're in our power to just cleanse ourselves from them. I don't want to hang out with these people anymore. I don't want to hang out with that. I don't want to associate with such people, etc., etc. Okay, so that is the 10th chapter of the Ramchal here in Mesilat Yesharim, and God willing, next week we will continue in the 11th chapter. Not chapter 11, but the 11th chapter. Okay? Chapter 11 is bankruptcy, right?
Reorganization.
Yeah, good. Reorganization. My dear friends, have a terrific evening. Thank you to our friends at We Learn, and thank you to all of our friends on Facebook and YouTube and all the other online platforms. Have a terrific evening.